Hello, my name's Adam Gripton, and my talk today for the conference is entitled Simulating Supermarket Home Deliveries in Cambridge, a Whole System View. So first let's talk about what we mean by a whole system view of supermarket home deliveries, so we can motivate the research into producing such a concept. So the audience for this talk doesn't need to be reminded of the urgency of the impending global climate crisis or the importance of the transport sector playing its part in reducing overall greenhouse gas emissions to net zero by 2050. This means that we should be preparing for a huge step change in uptake of electric vehicles over the next decade, both for private and commercial use. So combined with the ever-increasing popularity of online shopping and home delivery, especially in a post-COVID world, it's clear we should be thinking right now about what the new infrastructural landscape will look like to support current and future patterns of green delivery operations. So questions like, what range are battery-powered delivery vans likely to have? Is it still possible to deliver the same level of customer service if a supermarket's entire diesel fleet were to be replaced by electric vehicles at once? To what extent do we need to change logistical practices in order to ensure that electric vans with limited range and charging time can operate just as successfully as a diesel van that needs to be taken for a 5-minute refuel where necessary? So how will a fleet of electric vehicles be charged? Are there opportunities for longer rounds to make use of opportunistic charging hubs in order to avoid inconvenient returns to the depot? So these are questions that can't be fully addressed via the study of current practices alone, because the past is no longer a good predictor of the future. So, as well as that, due to the huge capital costs involved, particularly with new charging infrastructure, it's uneconomical to try such ideas out in the real world as a test case. So instead, the research team at SRF have made use of agent-based modelling. So this creates a virtual living lab, whereby a model of a test area can be simulated through the use of simulated agents capable of logical decision making. That creates a system that's capable of logistical self-organisation when it's presented with a scenario. So for example, you can make best use of opportunistic charging hubs to schedule longer delivery rounds. By nature, such a system only works when provided with a good set of customer orders to fulfill. Although it would be quite valid for each individual supermarket to conduct this analysis in-house with their historic order data, they would be limited to the extent by which they could invest in their own dedicated infrastructure, instead of realising potentially greater gains for themselves and the wider system by considering resource sharing with their competitors. An example of this may be a strategically located fast charging hub that's been planned and funded by a local authority based on knowledge of whole system patterns of deliveries in their area. So when generating evidence to support policy decisions at government level, it makes sense to try and simulate customer behaviour over the entire sector. So this takes into account patterns of likely orders for several competing supermarkets instead of one. Usually it would be prohibitively difficult to try and achieve this by sourcing historic order data from every supermarket delivery operation in an area, so different sources of data explaining customer behaviour do need to be used. So this study in particular makes use of a survey commissioned by SRF as a primary data source. The survey identifies 8 clustered classifications of consumer behaviour in the field of supermarket grocery deliveries. The idea is that encoded in each class definition is information about their supermarket preferences, the order frequency through delivery, collection or in-person shopping trips, the likely size of an order, the times of day at which the order is likely to be placed, and so on. So we can get a good idea of what overall system orders in an area will look like just by predicting the likely cluster distribution of each area. So use of the survey clusters is a powerful tool for our analysis. So here we see, for example, a graph estimating annual order quantities per cluster for 6 supermarkets in the study. So note how the clusters vary significantly both in order quantity but also, more importantly, in the relationship between different supermarket preferences. So cluster 2 here has a significant preference for Tesco, but you can see cluster 6 it quite commonly uses Asda. So, unfortunately, however, there's a major shortcoming within the survey data, and that's that we haven't yet been able to find any clear link between the cluster of each survey respondent and their demographic responses. So that includes age, household children, car ownership, employment status, or so on. So in order to establish a link between demographics and the survey clusters, we considered the historic order data that was kindly provided to us by Waitrose. In particular, we concentrated on the historic orders within the city of Cambridge. The idea here is to devise a system that will reproduce synthetic order patterns similar to what we observe in the historic order data we have, but that can do so for the full range of UK supermarkets covered by the survey. So in this way, we can quantify the extent to which different neighbourhoods would be likely to receive sufficient orders to, for example, make use of proposed opportunistic charging hubs, or to make the case to share deliveries with the competitors through a third-party logistics provider for mutual benefit. Our approach makes use of the publicly available Office for National Statistics small area classifications, which were based on the UK census in 2011. So this analysis splits Great Britain up into around 232,000 census output areas. So each of these typically consists of about 100 to 200 households each. And we assign to each a generic description of its demographics based on 3 levels of varying granularity. So the top level was assigned 8 separate classifications, as you can see examples of here. The next has 26 finer classifications, and the most granular 76 different classifications. So to take an example, an area classified as 2D3, which is EU white-collar workers, that's at the bottom level, would also fall into the broader classifications going back up of 2D, which is aspiring and affluent, but also number 2 at the very top level, which is cosmopolitans. So as an example, here's Cambridge divided into its 372 output areas, and I've coloured these by their top level OAC1 class, so the most broad category. So our idea was try to attach a characteristic set of cluster proportions from the survey to each of these class descriptions in the Office for National Statistics data, and to do so in such a way such that when they're combined with the known behaviours from the survey data, they produce order totals that were as concurrent as possible with that known historic data, at least as a best fit. In this way, we can gain confidence that the orders are being distributed as close as possible to the data we do have, at least in terms of area-specific behaviours. But we also leave the door open for new historic order data to be slotted into the system, which would increase the accuracy of predictions. As an aside, we should probably note here that in order to create graphs like the one we've been seeing estimating supermarket habits that are specific to different clusters, we need to settle on interpretations of the 6-point Likert scale responses to the 2 questions in the survey that mention specific supermarkets. So we've used the values you can see here in the table below, but we also accept that several interpretations are possible. The way in which the answers to these questions are combined is also a matter of judgment, particularly when some responses give completely nonsensical answers, like to question 15, I never buy from this retailer, but then in question 18, I order home delivery from there more than once a week. So if the cluster proportions are now the quantities we are seeking, the problem overall can be visualised as a solution to a system of simultaneous equations. So we're looking to find the best set of coefficients for the matrix shown here. Note that we're trying to find every coefficient in this matrix, not just a single row. If we take the OAC2 class as an example here, we seek 8 quantities that represent the different cluster proportions in the OAC2 area. So clearly these must sum to 1, because everyone is in one cluster or another. And they must also all be between 0 and 1. So that's 2 constraints that immediately fall out. We combine data from the survey and the historic orders by adding a condition that the predicted number of orders for each area type should, in some sense, agree with that observed in the order data. So with these conditions applying to each area and for each supermarket for which there's order data available. In general, the overall number of orders predicted by the survey won't necessarily be that observed in the historic order data. So we need to normalise the total order number over all the classes to ensure the proportions between the order totals are as close to those observed as possible. So after all this, we now have the definition of an optimization problem. So when we guess at a set of cluster proportions, we can calculate the discrepancy this will result in between the area proportions predicted and the true order totals for each supermarket. At this point, we need to add an extra condition to ensure that the overall cluster proportion share, as predicted by the survey, irrelevant of supermarket specific behaviours, is also maintained as closely as possible. So in order to solve this optimization, we use the MATLAB function fmincon to carry it out, and we did find good agreement with the order densities and relative cluster proportions, as you can see in these two graphs here. So the cluster share for each area is shown in the bar graph at the top. The important thing to note here is that once these proportions have been calculated through the optimization, they can actually now be used to generate orders for the remainder of the supermarkets, until such time as any historic order data from these supermarkets can also be used as well as the current data, and that will train a more refined system that way. And here's what the results look like. So cluster proportions are combined with known data about occupied households from the 2011 census. So that sets up a Poisson process to generate random orders for the correct frequencies over the whole test area of Cambridge. So here's some examples for Tesco, Sainsbury's and Asda. It's also important to note we can, of course, reproduce synthetic Waitrose orders itself this way too. It doesn't matter that the Waitrose order data was used as part of the training step. And as a final step, in order to set up order locations which the agent-based model can actually understand, we consulted the Ordnance Survey Code Point repository. So this provides locations of each postcode in Great Britain, and therefore it can translate these postcode orders into actual locations, as you can see here on the map, to which delivery agents can be sent. So note that at the moment we're only really considering where the daily orders will originate from, and we haven't yet attached information to the orders about the time of day, for example, the number of crates, or any of that other information, which in reality would be very useful for an agent-based model. Adding this information, though, is quite straightforward, as the likely distributions of these parameters would also be driven by the behaviours shown in each of the clusters. So thank you for your attention today. If you'd like to ask any questions at this point, please do feel free. Otherwise, my email is on screen right now, and I look forward to hearing from you. Thank you very much.